We're back for Your Ears Only. I'm David Alpern.
I'm Eddie Robinson with this quote from the news. This is an attempt to stage a coup, and nobody wants it, even the people who are against the Islamists. That was Cairo human rights activist Nagad El-Borai on the Egyptian military's tightening grip as conservative Muslim groups gain in continuing elections. Now this.
The Governing Council decided to lower the key ECB interest rates by 25 basis points. The outlook remains subject to high uncertainty and substantial downside risks.
The 17 Eurozone members, plus 6 others, will conclude an intergovernmental treaty.
Not even new European Central Bank Chief Mario Draghi believed that lowering the ECB rate back to 1% last week would solve the threatening euro crisis. And there were doubts as well about the new treaty announced by European Council President Herman Van Rompuy for more unified financial control to be negotiated by all nations that actually use the euro currency and 6 others, but notably not Great Britain, where the traditional pound still rules.
To talk more about what happened at the big Euro conference in Brussels, what didn't, and how both will impact economic and political matters across the continent and around the world, including Wall Street. For Your Ears Only, we're joined by Nicolas Veron. He's a visiting fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Let's start with Brussels. How much new central oversight and discipline over the separate European economies, budgets, fiscal policies is promised?
I think it's important to keep in mind that this is the first step in what will be a long and probably bumpy negotiation of a new treaty. So leaders made a number of decisions this week, the most important of which being this notion that they will negotiate without the UK, but it's far from a final version. So we don't know what the final version will be because they will discover in the course of that negotiation a number of constraints and limitations of the initial approach that will probably result in some innovations down the line. At this point, they have agreed on a number of checks on member states' individual fiscal policies with sanctions for those who don't comply by the rules. At this point, it's not about financial solidarity among Eurozone member states, so it's a sort of very toned down, very constrained version of fiscal federalism. I suspect that there will be more mutual guarantees and forms of financial solidarity in the final version.
How much in new financial resources have Eurozone nations agreed to make available to avoid major bank and government bankruptcies in the meantime, and is it enough?
They have this headline number of 200 billion euros that will be provided to the IMF. But I think this will evolve over time, too. I mean, we have seen that Eurozone member states have been consistently unable to put on the table a sufficient amount of money to frighten the financial markets into submission. And at this point of the crisis, it's not enough to convince the investor community that things are under control and that there is enough financial firepower in the hands of Eurozone leaders to stem the crisis.
We heard the European Central Bank boss promise a lowering of key interest rates, but there was some confusion about what else the ECB might do. Hints it might make more funds available, but then backing away. And there are some who say that it would be dangerous for the ECB to take on the kind of control over money supply that the U.S. Federal Reserve enjoys in our economy. What's your view?
Well, the ECB has more limited leeway on policies than the Federal Reserve because it is independent, but it doesn't have the same framework of federal fiscal policy behind it, underlying its operations that the Fed has with the power of the U.S. Treasury. So the ECB has to be cautious, is cautious. Some would say too cautious, but I think they are basically right to say that they cannot introduce solidarity and burden sharing in financial terms among Eurozone nations, which is ultimately a political decision that has to be made by elected officials. This is not something that the ECB can resolve alone.
But you've expressed doubt that Europe's elected national leaders don't have the political influence or independence to create a really effective new federal system. Tell us more about that.
It's not a question of independence. It's a question of political determination. They're all national leaders, right? None of them has an electoral mandate from the entire citizenry of the Eurozone or of the European Union. So they basically respond to incentives from their national electorates. They want to be re-elected in each nation, and there is no alignment of interest between, say, the voters in Germany, the voters in France, or the voters in Italy in terms of defining what the Eurozone federal fiscal framework and federal banking policy framework should look like. So this is a core problem at the heart of this crisis, and this is why it is reasonable, if risky, to enter a discussion about changing the institutions, changing the treaty, to have a better functioning decision-making process down the line. It's a very difficult set of decisions to make. I mean, in America, this is often painted of, why don't they just make this decision? It's so obvious, it's so easy. But this is about changing the whole notion of sovereignty among European countries. This is about sharing very big powers over budgets, over tax, over key functions of the government. And I don't think it should be surprising that they find it difficult to make these decisions, and that a lot of time has been lost in hesitation and debate. Because again, this is historically difficult, and this is also why the UK has found itself so uncomfortable, because it's really on a different pace, on a different in a different mood compared to its continental neighbors about all these issues of sovereignty and pooling decision-making.
And, of course, it doesn't even use the euro. But to the degree that a Eurofix actually does work, could an unintended consequence be the fall-off of international investment in U.S. Treasury bonds that grew even after they got a lower credit rating following the big debt ceiling debate? In other words, have we been benefiting from the crisis that also threatens us and the rest of the world's economies?
You're right. If the Eurozone gets its act together, builds a credible fiscal federal framework, has some safe haven asset that doesn't exist now, but creates a Eurobond that would be attractive to international investors. If all these conditions are met, maybe the market for U.S. treasuries will look less attractive. But we're far from there. I mean, at this point, we're in a situation where the risks are much more on the European side than on the U.S. side. Who knows what will happen in 3 years' time? At this particular moment, I think the concerns have to be much more about the Eurozone than the U.S.
Nicolas Veron is a visiting fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington.
Quote from the news, "We just ran out of gas." That was Harry Kerr, director of the Southeast chapter of the Pearl Harbor Survivors Association, on the decision to make last week's 70th anniversary the last one marked by the group because of members' age, deteriorating health, or death.
Next, yet another target for the occupiers, venture capital, for your ears only.